Good morning, everyone. Before we get started, I'm going to give everyone a few moments to enter into the webinar. We appreciate you joining this morning. Thank you for everyone who is attending this webinar this morning. We're looking forward to discussing 5 key tech trends that cross-industry government and community leaders must embrace to forge a better future. We're going to give everyone about until 10:01 to join us this morning for this wonderful webinar. We have a great panel discussion with a lot of the Greater Sacramento Economic Council board members who are going to talk about some of the tech trends this morning. Good morning, everyone. Thanks for joining. If you're just coming in and logging on to the webinar, we appreciate you attending this morning. Okay, I think it's 10:01, so we'll begin. Good morning, everyone. Before we get started, I'm going to give you some housekeeping notes. Thank you all for joining us today. My name is Michelle Willard, and I'm the Vice President of Marketing and Communications here at the Greater Sacramento Economic Council. Today's program is a webinar format, which means attendees will not have their cameras or microphones enabled. Additionally, today's program will be recorded and sent out to all registered attendees. We have an incredible lineup of speakers today and encourage you to use the Q&A function to ask questions during the program. And we're proud to partner with Accenture to bring you their Technology Vision 2021 report. And I'd like to thank you all again for joining us today. Without further ado, I'd like to hand it off to Greater Sacramento board member and Accenture's Sacramento office managing director, Mark Noriega. Good morning, Mark. Thank you for...
Good morning, Michelle. Thank you. And thank you to everybody joining this morning for our discussion. We're very excited to share our technology vision for 2021. This is the latest in our series of tech visions. We do this annually so that we can share some of those technologies that will be disrupting industry across the spectrum. This year's report is titled Leaders Wanted, Masters of Change at a Moment of Truth. And I don't think anything could be more true than that title given the last year that we've all been through. As the leader of the Sacramento office, we've been very much involved with the vaccine distribution and management. So it's been quite the year, one that I will remember. I'd also like to thank the distinguished panelists that are going to be joining us today as part of the trends review. Secretary, our Treasurer Fiona Ma, Sutter Health COO James Conforti, Los Rios Community College District Chancellor Dr. Brian King, and Accenture's West Technology Lead Rob Barber. You know, for those who don't know, Accenture is a global professional services firm, and our purpose is really to deliver on the promise of technology and human ingenuity, helping our clients untrap or release trapped value within their organizations. With over 4,000 practitioners in Northern California and over 500,000 globally, we serve clients of all industries and really are excited to bring the technology vision to you so you can see a little bit forward of what's over the horizon, so to speak, so that we can actually share some of those new trends that you as leaders in the business community are going to have to tackle. So without further ado, I'm going to make the transition and transfer to my partner, Mary Hamilton. Mary, take it away and Accenture's 2021 technology vision.
Thank you, Mark. Thrilled to be here. Thank you for having me. Thanks everyone for joining. As a great tee up, Mark, our technology vision is something that we do every year, and it's really about predicting the most significant technology trends that we think are going to disrupt business over the next 3 years, and then thinking prescriptively about how we can help companies take advantage of that or address those trends. So excited to dig in. This year's vision, if we could hit the next slide, is really about digital technology, right? And if you think about digital technology over this past year, it really has been a lifeline that sustained us through the pandemic. And it's really redefining our reality today. If you think about where we've been and where we're going in this brief year, just over a year, it's as though we've pushed a giant fast forward button into the future. And we've seen many organizations stepping up to use technology in truly extraordinary ways to keep their businesses, to keep their communities running, and doing it at a pace that no one thought was possible. And because of all this rapid technology adoption that we've seen happen, we're actually seeing a fair number of companies being optimistic about return to pre-COVID levels of revenue growth. We've done some surveys around this, and 30% of companies expect to return in 2021. Another 30% expect to recover in 2022. So that's great, right? And I think we're seeing a lot of growth and achievement through digital and through technology. But if you look at the other end of the spectrum, the laggards, right? Companies who had really postponed their digital transformation or were pursuing it, taking it slowly, they really had a rude awakening during this pandemic, these pandemic times. And they weren't able to rapidly pivot, right, to address the demands that were coming at them rapid fire. And we've seen what we call the digital achievement gap, the stark difference between the leaders and the laggards. We've seen that change pretty significantly. So pre-pandemic, we did studies around this, and that digital achievement gap was really that the leaders were growing revenues 2 times faster than the laggards, and that was great motivation to get on board the digital train and everybody start moving quickly. But now today we're actually seeing a 5 times gap in that digital achievement and growing revenues from the leaders and the laggards. So that gap is growing, and it's growing fast. And we have a short window for companies who are in the laggard or kind of more traditional positions to catch up, right? And we really are in a once in a generation moment. We have an opportunity not just to react to the crisis, but to reinvent what comes next, right? And we think the boldest, most visionary leaders, those who use technology to master change, will define the future of business and the human experience. So we hit the next slide. I want to talk a little bit about the realities that we're facing today. And this is going to set the framing for the 5 trends that we'll talk about. The first reality is really around the human experience. It's the radical and rapid reinvention of the lived experience of more than 7 billion people. It's everything from how we connect with colleagues, to our family and friends, to how we meet basic needs like food and health, getting groceries, to even how we entertain ourselves, right? Everything has changed. And just some examples to bring that, or some statistics to bring that to life. Over the past year, in the US, more money was spent online in April and May of 2020 than during the last 12 Cyber Mondays combined. Right? So shopping has changed pretty drastically. And if you think about healthcare, the number of telehealth primary care visits increased 350 times from pre-pandemic levels. Right? So this is our new experience. This is setting the expectations that consumers, employees all have today. The second reality is around technology. And every business is truly a technology business. So companies that were leaders in this space pre-COVID are doubling down on their investments in technology. In May, we did some surveys, and 50% of the companies that we surveyed said they were going to significantly increase their investments in digital transformation and technology. By July, it was 80%. And some great, there are just tons of examples of this, but I'll take one that is highly relevant today. Moderna. They were fully in the cloud. They have their drug design studio, which is run on Amazon Web Services, helping them to do the design more quickly. And then they're using things like neural networks, machine learning to optimize for production. And that really enabled them to dramatically accelerate the process of developing a new vaccine. And we all see the results today, right? So that is meaningful. If you think about retail and the restaurant industry, one great example of a leader that emerged that was investing in the digital transformation and was able to pivot quickly was Starbucks. By August 2020, their mobile ordering and drive-through pickup orders accounted for 90% of their sales. So as that demand surged, they deployed an integrated ticket management system that combined the orders from its app, from Uber Eats, right, external partner, drive-through customers, and create a single workflow for their baristas. They also introduced new technology like espresso machines with sensors, so they could track how much coffee was being poured and be proactive about the maintenance around that. The third new reality is around how we work and how we collaborate. So we're clearly not going to return to work as it was pre-pandemic. According to Gartner, nearly 50% of employees will probably work at least part-time remotely post-COVID versus 30% pre-pandemic. And we're seeing new ways to use technology to stay connected. There's a huge surge in extended reality, right? How do we immerse ourselves in a digital space? And for stats, right? The number of daily online meeting participants. For Zoom in 2020, it was 300 million daily participants. Google Meet, 100 million. Teams, 75 million, right? So we're at almost 500 million daily participants in digital experiences. I mean, we're here today doing that. And I think part of it was how quickly organizations could make that shift. So we actually worked with the United Kingdom's National Health Service in March 2020. So just as the pandemic was hitting, in a matter of weeks, to partner up with Microsoft to deploy Microsoft Teams to 1.2 million employees. And that platform then allowed their doctors to have virtual appointments, for the NHS to host virtual town hall events, and just to connect their staff both internally but also externally for the meetings that they needed to have with colleagues. And that isn't going to change. I think one thing that we've seen with that work trend is that through the pandemic, we've all sort of democratized the experience, right? We are all remote and everyone's experienced that. As we come back, I think we're going to need to think carefully about those who are back in person versus those who are remote, and make sure we're being inclusive and thinking about the experience across a hybrid type model. And then the fourth trend is really around sustainability. And sustainability is the new digital. Companies are, as they're rebuilding, as they're pivoting, they're thinking about sustainability, about fairness, inclusion, access, right? And what that really means and how to power it. So that we've found that companies who are leveraging technology and sustainability are 2.5 times more likely to be among tomorrow's strongest performing business than those who are not. And it's not just about, how do we think about sustainability, but it's really embedding sustainability and inclusion into the core by design and being intentional about those capabilities. All right, so now that I've set the framing here, let me talk a little bit kind of about the profound shift and then how that's driving the changes. So first of all, the pace of technology, the pace is changing exponentially and it's only increasing from here, right? I mentioned consumer and worker expectations. Those have shifted radically. And all of that is really leading to, again, a once in a generation rethinking of business Yeah, we have an opportunity now to, let go of old business models and be innovative and drive change. But that window is fairly small, right? And it's tightening as we're coming out of the pandemic. So as a result of all those seismic changes, we need a new type of leadership attribute. And that really is the ability to master change. And just kind of to leave you with a thought on that, right? Change is something that should be passionately pursued, not passively feared. And we need leaders to deliver on the promise of human ingenuity and technology together. So to do that, we think there are 5 key areas of focus. The first is what we call stack strategically. And it's really about thinking about architecture in a new way for the future. So if we think about every business being a technology business, it's really clear that in the future, companies are going to need to compete not just on their business models, but on their architecture, right? But building and leveraging that some of the most competitive technology stacks means thinking about it differently, right? It's bringing together business and technology strategies. It's architecting in a more modular and agile way. And a great example of this in the real world is what NVIDIA did when they launched Clara Guardian. It's a smart hospital solution, and it enabled hospitals to install the system in over 10,000 hospital rooms. And it really touched every layer of the technology architecture, right? From the edge AI chips and GPUs as the horsepower to smart sensors. They were able to stream data, generate insights about body temperatures, movement, social distancing, mask detection, using pre-trained data models to predict, a diagnosis or whether a patient was going to be sent to the ICU. And then on top of that, they layered human computer experiences and interactions like a voice-powered assistant and dynamic wayfinding. Right? So they really went from the infrastructure to the data, to the intelligence, to the experience level, and thought carefully about that architecture from the healthcare standpoint. The next trend is what we call mirrored world. And this is around what we call an intelligent digital twin. And that means really taking a digital model, creating a digital model for the physical world. And that then, if you layer the intelligence on top of that, becomes a living model for things like factories, supply chains, product life cycles, truly everything that we experience in the world. And it's bringing together that data, that intelligence, which is representing the physical world in the data, in the digital space, and allowing us to really think about new ways to operate, collaborate, innovate on the business reality. The next trend, iTechnologist, is all about democratizing technology. If you think about all those powerful capabilities that I just described, there's a huge opportunity at the grassroots level for people across the business to start taking advantage of these technologies, right? Every employee can now be an innovator. They have insights at their fingertips. They can optimize their work. They can fix pain points, and they can understand the new demands that are coming and keep their business, rapidly adapting and in lockstep with those changing needs. We at Accenture actually have rolled out a program to help facilitate that democratization. We call it our Technology Quotient Training, or TQ, as we finally call it. But it's really a global learning initiative that we've rolled out to up-level everyone in our organization to really be conversant in technology, right? To be able to adapt and understand and take advantage of the next waves of technology that are coming. Next trend, anywhere, everywhere. This is really, we call it bring your own environment. And it's not bring your own device, right? It's really transforming remote work from an accommodation to an advantage, and rethinking about how work gets done and how you virtualize what everyone is doing in your organization. Another example of this is something called immersive collaboration platform. I mentioned the digital twins and the mirrored world. we're starting to see extended reality now coming into play, where we can create digital environments of a space. We're working with a large entertainment company to think about different ways to leverage this. One, to continue to help their leaders understand what new technologies are there and to be able to rapidly prototype and try things in a digital space, to be able to collaborate, in ways that were never thought possible through this kind of truly immersive and digital space. And it's giving us opportunity to collaborate in ways that take advantage of both physical and digital that we've never been able to do before. And then the last trend here is really what we call from me to we. It's a multi-party strategy. So we've been talking about the criticality of ecosystem partnerships for years in our vision trends. But we're seeing today, through all these changes, the demand for contact tracing, for frictionless payments, new ways to build trust and provide security across those ecosystems. That has truly come into sharp focus over the last year. And it's brought into focus not just that it's necessary, but also gaps in resiliency, adaptability in that security model, in those security models. And so we see things like the new multi-party systems as a way to unlock those ecosystem forward opportunities and standards that sit across industries. So just kind of in conclusion, I think we are truly in a historic moment. And I would challenge all of you to think about how you can become your own masters of change, how you can embrace and adopt technology to really tackle some of these trends, but truly become a laggard, to become a leader, not a laggard, and to even leapfrog. It's an opportunity to do things differently, to think differently, to change models that exist today, and take advantage of all that. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Jennifer Hall, who's going to take us into our esteemed panel and talk about some of the real world applications of these trends.
Thanks a lot, Mary. Really appreciate it. And during this conversation with our panelists, we'll be asking them some questions about how they've seen these technology trends come to life or how they've experienced them in their industries. My name is Jennifer Hall. I am our innovation lead here in Sacramento for Accenture, and I've had the pleasure of meeting several of you through some of these webinars over the last year. For those I haven't met, it's great to meet you. Rob Barber, I'm going to be starting off with you, and I'll ask you and all the panelists to introduce yourself after I ask the question. But thinking through the rapid changes of the last year, and you really, from your role, have seen all of the industries changing and the decision speed picking up. But can you tell us a little bit about some examples of technology-driven changes that you've seen over the last 12 months?
Sure, happy to. Thanks, Jen. I'm Rob Barber. I lead our technology business for Accenture on the West Coast. As Jen knows and Dr. King know, I'm a proud American River alum and a UOP alum as well, even though I don't live in the area anymore. But I think for me, Jen, I would say one of the biggest changes we've seen, and I've got to witness this and be part of it, is IT departments kind of went from roadies to rock stars in a matter of weeks. And there's been a huge amount of investment that's really been stirred up around digital transformation and innovation that came out of COVID. Obviously, everybody's moving to cloud. That's, and I mean everyone, mom and pop stores, Fortune 100 companies, everybody is moving to the cloud, and in different ways. And we can probably talk in more detail about where all that's going. The customer experience component around B2B and B2C and guided selling and how companies now who have driven a huge amount of traffic to their e-commerce sites, how they're actually going to drive conversion rates up, leverage the data that they have. We've seen investments in what used to be kind of considered mundane IT projects that the business kind of yawned at and said, boy, why am I spending $5 million doing that? If I'm going to go put microservices in, I don't understand. But when Mary talks about the the Starbucks example, and they go, aha, the reason I was able to connect with Uber Eats and do all this stuff in a matter of weeks was because I have this architecture, this investment that I've made in modularizing my architecture. It all kind of becomes, the light bulb has gone off, and I think a lot of folks are now looking more at that. Uh, Mary talked about security. We all recently know about the initiatives that have been put in place by the government around authentication and other things that are all going to become more and more important because we've all kind of gone online, and much more digital security has, you know, been pushed even more to the forefront. And then I'd say lastly, you know, that because we were forced to do things so fast over the last year, the expectation of the speed at which we're going to move and the risks that we're going to take have skyrocketed from a technology perspective. So there's a handful of ones that I'm seeing.
Thanks, Rob. Treasurer Ma, I'm going to hand it over to you next, but could you also introduce yourself and then and talk a little bit about how you've seen the technology changes in your own department and across our state's government over the last year?
Sure. Fiona Ma, California State Treasurer, one of the 8 constitutional officers. I am the state's banker, so every tax, fine, fee, interest, penalty comes into my bank or my office, totaling over $2 trillion a year. I invest the state's idle funds and also invest for 22 local government units. That portfolio is $135 billion. And I also issue all the bonds for the state, general obligation, revenue, lease revenue, as well as for the UC and CSU system. But I would just say at the Treasurer's Office, I'm a small agency. We only have 450 employees, but we had to pivot quickly and transition as many of our team members to laptops and VBMs and working from home. And it was really difficult at the beginning, especially for some of our 3 divisions that have to accept cash. We have to invest the cash, and we issued bonds even during the pandemic. And a couple of times we were closed because of the riots in Sacramento. And so we were 100% remote work. And that kind of made us nervous because, we're used to being at work. Sometimes there's 4 people that have to sign off on a transaction. We balance every day to the penny and actually 3 decimal points over. And that kind of test of our technology and the ability to continue to get all the work done was very, very trying, but we managed to do it. So like Rob said, we had to transition very, very quickly. A lot of things didn't work. People, for one reason or another, they couldn't get through all of our Zoom calls. Sometimes, links don't work and we're frozen, and just like everybody else is experiencing. But as a government agency, we were able to do it, which was very, very surprising. And we thank technology for allowing us to be able to actually be able to continue our work during this pandemic.
And Treasurer Ma, I think, what you just described is exactly when we say it's the intersection of human ingenuity and technology, having, people saying like, we got to find a way to make this work. Having the technology that enables that rapidly is really the game changer, regardless of the industry. Brian King, Dr. King, education, another huge thing. People show up in class, you learn in class, your entire model changed overnight. Tell us a little bit about the technology-driven changes you saw in the educational realm.
Oh, certainly, Jennifer. And I'm Brian King, Chancellor for the 4 Los Rios colleges. Rob, appreciate another success story from American River, our other colleges, Cosumnes River, Folsom Lake, and Sac City. So many of our participants today may not know that Los Rios was the largest provider of online education among public institutions in the region before the pandemic. And we knew that online education was the most rapid area of growth. So we were doing work to be positioned for an increase in online education. We didn't know that we were going to be almost 100% online when we made the decision on Friday the 13th, back last March, to transfer to remote education and services. So almost 100% of our inventory went online with very little advanced planning, and all the aches and pains that you can imagine would go with that. And many faculty members who were sworn that they would never, ever teach online, suddenly the only way they could teach was online. So we're hopeful that in the return to normalcy after the pandemic, we'll have a much greater capacity among our faculty and a willingness to teach online. And I believe we will. But in terms of services, the example I give is talking to our folks. If you needed an airline ticket, would you love having to go to the airport to get that ticket because you had personal service? And in many ways, pre-pandemic, that was our mentality, that face-to-face interactions were so superior that our students would love to get in a car or get on a train or ride their bike to see us face-to-face. And in the pandemic, we've had almost all of our services available remotely, pretty bulky initially. So I think we've seen a lot of areas for improvement. And Tamara Armstrong, our Associate Vice Chancellor for IT, has done a great job and is participating in this Zoom meeting today, leading our technology efforts. So we had to do things in a very short order that normally would have taken years. And in higher education, we're not usually nimble. So I think the accelerant of this crisis has been really good for our students and for our faculty. And we've seen that technology is a piece of the solution, but really doing cultural change in a more nimble way is just as important as the technology change. That having good tools is important, but if you don't have the training in place and the willing to embrace new ways of doing things, the technology alone doesn't solve the problem. So we're really excited. Probably January of 2022, before we return to anything approaching normalcy, we're going to have a transition in the fall with much more on ground, but still a lot of our instruction remotely. So the learning curve is steep. And just one other quick point, you might not think about us in terms of market share, but in higher education, community colleges across California and across the country have been really hit in terms of enrollment, which is not what was predicted, that normally in tough economic times, the enrollment at community college grows. But for Los Rios, we're down about 10% in our towards compared to pre-pandemic enrollment. So a huge strategic challenge is finding ways to serve students remotely and regain access, particularly to our students of color, our Black, our Latino, Latina students, our low-income students who have just been crushed by the pandemic and have had to work extra and reduce the hours that they're taking, and in some instances have not thrived in a remote environment. So a key strategic initiative for us is using technology to make sure we can recapture the students who have been lost. A little different dynamic for CSU and UC, where both Sacramento State and UC Davis turn students away and have students on their waiting lists. For our community colleges and for our community, we have to find the students who have not been able to access higher education during the pandemic. And thinking about a post-pandemic world and a focus on credentials and real world skills, community colleges are going to be more important than ever. So that intersection between technology and meeting the needs of our students and employees is going to be more important than it's ever been before.
Thank you, Brian. It's exceptional reflections there. And I did not know that statistic about Los Rios. So thanks for sharing that. James, you arguably was in the industry that probably of all of us talking was the one hit most on kind of a day-to-day level, and then running your business while saving lives, while dealing with something that's very unknown, changing healthcare, ensuring there was continuity of care, as well as dealing with the crisis. So tell us a little bit about the technology changes for you over the last year in Sutter Health.
Yeah, thank you, Jennifer. It's been quite a year. It's been quite a year for everyone, not just us, but clearly as a healthcare provider, we've experienced something that we hope to never experience again. But we were really happy to be a part of the statewide response to dealing with this pandemic and its impact on the communities that we serve. Good morning, everyone. I'm James Conforti. I'm the Chief Operating Officer of Sutter Health. We are based here in Sacramento, but with 23 hospitals and 275 clinics across 22 counties in Northern California. We certainly had our share of changes over the last year in trying to make sure that our organizational response was effective and aligned and integrated with the statewide response. You know, it's interesting, someone made the comment about, you know, every business is becoming a technology business. We're certainly that in healthcare. And I don't think that anyone in healthcare would argue that point. And in fact, when I became Chief Operating Officer 3 years ago, we moved the responsibility of information technology to the Chief Operating Officer. The CIO reports to me. Information technology is one of my core responsibilities, and we're inextricably linked with technology, both on the clinical and the business front. We're a large business, of course, but we're also a care provider, and the clinical aspects of technology and the business aspects of technology both impact us greatly. In terms of technology-driven changes over the last 12 months, I could go on forever, and I'm really, as bad as the situation was, I'm thrilled that it accelerated some of our acceptance of technology. It accelerated some of our deployment of technology, both on a clinical and a business basis. Some of the changes, you know, we are an employer. We have 55,000 employees. In a matter of seconds, just like many of you, we realized that we were not going to be able to have certain people come back to work and work in an office environment. We currently still have over 10,000 employees that are working from home. So if you think about the logistics of setting that up, it's not just go home. I know you have a nice work home environment. It's go home. We need to be able to set you up safely and securely because we're dealing with protected data. But also we realize you have family at home who might also be working from home or might be going to school at home or might even be teaching school at home. And so the balance of all of that and making sure that those 10,000 employees have a work environment at home that's relatively free from distraction. But we experienced all the challenges that I'm sure that the audience has as well. But the scale of 10,000 employees in Northern California being working from home challenged us in the early days. But we were able to effectively do so. As a healthcare provider, Mary mentioned the incredible increase in virtual visits and the use and acceptance of them. Pre-COVID, we had our best month. I think we had 1,000 virtual visits across our entire system. In 2020, we delivered over 1 million. So we are an example, a data point of that change and that huge change in not only the use and the technology, but the acceptance of our patients as a reasonable and safe way to interact with their healthcare providers, and the acceptance of our providers as another front door to deal with their patients in ways that might meet their needs in a really challenging environment. You know, sadly, we also had to use technology to develop a means for family members to interact with loved ones who were going through, and I hope none of you had to experience this, but the odds are many of you did, where loved ones were really struggling clinically, and some of them were declining very rapidly. And the environment was not one where we could actually have physical contact. That could not happen. And so our staff was challenged with how can we allow for families in a compassionate way to have some interaction with their loved ones, and technology was our only way to do that. So we did, it worked. It's not in any way a replacement for the level of interaction that a family and a support system needs in a time like that, but it did help tremendously. Leveraging our EICU and other remote monitoring capabilities accelerated. We were glad we had the platform already in place, but we definitely accelerated its use. And then I would like to say, you know, from a supply chain, surge planning, cross-leveling capacity of all of our equipment and PPE and people, and actually even moving patients around the system around Northern California and knowing where we had access. Our data analytic capabilities allowed us to be able to do that and help support not only Sutter Health's needs, but also some of the counties and the statewide needs that came up across this. The last thing I'd like to just point out, and I know that you guys talked about it and hit on this, as a heavily tech-enabled industry, we continue to enhance our cybersecurity efforts to ensure resiliency of our business systems, but also our clinical systems and the safety of our patient information. We must do that, and we have enhanced and been more aggressive about that each and every week, literally. The volume and the velocity of cyber attack activities that we have seen as a healthcare provider has been accelerating tremendously, and I think that's a national and global trend. And I would just suggest, if you're not focused proactively on this threat, as you enable all of this technology, I would encourage you all to think about that and start thinking about that yesterday. So those are just some of the things we're dealing with.
James, thank you for that. I mean, you talked a little bit there even about the trapped value of being able to go to a doctor's visits on the phone. You're not taking the time to park, to go into a parking garage. We're unlocking value at scale just by means of some of those virtual visits. And then you talk about the technology, having the platforms that enabled you to make those rapid changes. That's really the critical factor to think about in terms of accelerating in the future. Now, do you have any thoughts about what the next evolution or game-changing technology might be you guys are taking a look at? You mentioned a couple things around security and platforms, but anything where Sutter sees the businesses going in the next 12 months?
Oh gosh, it's a great question, and it's impacting us in so many different ways. I do want to reiterate we are a large business as well, and so all of those business challenges and opportunities that the audience face, we do as well. We're a $13 billion company. We have 55,000 employees, 12,000 physicians that we try to provide a care environment for. I think some of the things. The two areas that when you look at your 5 trends that kind of stuck to me was the I technologist piece and the anywhere, everywhere piece. But as you talked about anywhere, everywhere, you talked about employees and how can they work. We think about it in terms of employees and patients. And this anywhere, everywhere approach to how patients now interact with the healthcare system is going to be something that I think we find accelerating. On the first I technology piece, we are seeing a huge enhancement and acceleration of using both AI and RPA or artificial intelligence and robotic process automation to accelerate, both in the clinical and administrative space. We're seeing solutions that, have the capability of enhancing both the safety and accuracy with which we provide care, but also can contribute to efficiency as well. And we understand the challenge of making healthcare affordable and accessible for everyone, and the benefits realization of some of this and some of these capabilities can really have an impact on cost of care as well. And so it's playing out in so many different arenas for us, and we're trying to just make sure that it all weaves together and connects in a way that makes sense in terms of how we structure the investments in technology, but how we integrate that as well. In terms of anywhere and everywhere, this not only applies to our employees, as I mentioned, but how we configure the workplace in a post-COVID environment, how we interact with our patients differently, and more importantly, how our patients interact with us and with the healthcare delivery system differently is something that's really, we think is going to continue to accelerate, and we sure hope we don't go backwards. We need to retain those gains and that acceleration that I talked about earlier. We don't want to go back. We want to use technology to meet our patients where they are, interact with them in ways that they're comfortable with and that work for them as they're trying to balance all these changes as well. We certainly understand they're more comfortable interacting with us virtually than we maybe gave them credit for. Our challenge is how do we strike that balance between the virtual and the in-person that's necessary, and that will continue to be required as we move forward. I think a challenge that we're working through is this: how do we incorporate all this remote monitoring capability that has become a part of everyone's daily life? Apple Watches, Fitbits, 12.0 or whatever they're on these days. All of this patient data and a 24/7 flow of this data into systems is a challenge for us. Not only is it a challenge just for storage, if you think about just the storage requirements of all of this, but also what if it signals an issue that requires clinical intervention? There's a risk that our providers feel about that because they can't possibly be monitoring this data 24/7 as fast as it's coming in. So we've got to be thinking about how we can do that and how we can leverage technology to identify anomalies that kind of give us a warning that, hey, something's looking different here without having to have a person looking at it every second of every day. This is where we think AI and RPA could help, but we're working through it. It's a real challenge. Robotic technology is going to continue to accelerate in the clinical side, and I could spend a whole hour just talking about that. But from a patient safety perspective, the outcomes are better, the hospital stays are less, the infection risks are less, the pain management intervention are less. All of these things are better for patients, and we're really excited about where we see robotic technology in the clinical and surgical space moving on. And the last thing from we to me, and I'll shut up here, but we've accepted that we've got to learn how to partner better with organizations that really drive this technology better and faster. And we've always thought we should do everything ourselves, and a capability, and I think a differentiation for companies in the future is going to be those that can learn how to partner better and more effectively with our digital partners out there that are really driving the digital transformation.
Thank you, and appreciate that detail there and the perspective that you shared. Brian, when James was talking about some of the technology changes, can you speak to where you see the future of work going? Certainly, we've seen it change over the last year as we look at behaviors, preferences, values. How are you guys thinking about it from an educational perspective about approaching the workplace or on-campus strategy, given long-term solutions?
Great question. And I think the issues we're facing are probably shared by all the panelists and all the participants today, recognizing that much work that we had presumed could only happen in person and face-to-face was being done during the pandemic, in some instances being done even better and with better outcomes for our customers, our students. So we're going through a process this summer. Our faculty in large part are off contract in the summer. So the summers are a little bit of a chance for us to look strategically and organizationally about the future of work. That's high on our list of topics to tackle this summer, and think about which jobs have been, in some cases, enhanced with remote work, and also what work needs to be in person. So it will be a hybrid solution moving forward. And back to the technology piece, recognizing that in many instances, students don't want a face-to-face encounter, but those students who need it shouldn't have to wait in line. So we're looking at areas like financial aid and onboarding, what we call admissions and records, where there's been a lot of friction and opportunities that we see to dramatically improve the service to our students. And for our employees, recognizing that the world of work is going to be different. We're also in an environment with a lot of labor partners, so we have to work very closely with our collective bargaining units. That's a piece of managing the changes in the world of work. And our organization, again, very traditional. I don't know if it's fair to say we were hostile to remote work not many years ago, but certainly not receptive to it. So we've taken almost a 180 as an organization, recognizing that if employees can do their job effectively remotely, it opens up a lot of opportunities for us, that employees and from a faculty standpoint, getting way ahead of where we are in the discussion with our unions. If a faculty member is incredibly effective teaching online, it matters a whole lot less where they are. So one of the exciting opportunities is we may have access to talent beyond the Sacramento region in a way that we didn't before. And I think that's exciting, to be thinking about the remote world of work, allowing some opportunities to really look for talent outside of the capital region, across California, and sometimes across the country. And I think on a personal note, I have found, as I imagine many of us have, that the remote work frees up time in my day. So I would envision in a post-pandemic world being much more attuned to what some people think about that time to think and read and write, and blocking off a day. I don't know if it'll be every week, that may be overly optimistic, but regularly having a day where I will not go into the office the way I normally would have, and have more time to think and read, and have more focus on strategy and less on the urgent and fighting fires.
Really being intentional about that time usage and thoughtful about it. Treasurer Ma, as we kind of think about the questions that I asked the other panelists, but also thinking about it from like a Greater Sacramento community perspective, as we think about these 4 new realities, what role can government play? What role can we as community leaders play in making the post-pandemic world even better? And what steps are you guys thinking about in terms of a more inclusive and sustainable future?
Yeah, so like Brian, I don't think government, was kind of the same thing, hostile to remote work, right? Because it just wasn't in our DNA, and it's not in our job descriptions when we hire people. And I think, society expects government to be open, to be able to walk in someplace and be able to, get your permit or pay your bill or talk to someone, right? So I do think, like Brian, we also have a lot of collective bargaining units, and it's going to be up to, what is bargain in terms of what we're going to see post-pandemic. But I do think we are going to better, let's see, we're going to be able to hopefully process a lot of things like permits, where you used to have to go down to your permit, local permit agency and get things stamped and pay your bill. Like, a lot of things are going to go remote these days. And I know, because I know technology companies are always calling me going, hey, we can do this, we can do that. Can you introduce me to that? So I think, to the extent that we could do more remote systems in government, to, again, so people don't have to get in their cars, they have to stand in line, waste a whole day. I think that is going to be the process improvements that we are going to see in government. And I think that's going to be better for society as a whole.
I think really where we can move any routine work to something that can be done, with automated insights, and then allow the people who are doing the jobs to be able to focus on the more high value work and the personal service.
Right.
Then you have a greater experience overall. And I think I saw in the chat that someone says they don't want to have to walk into an office, a government office, to get something done, and getting things done online has been wonderful. So certainly I think that's something a lot of us would like to see forward. Rob, I'm going to ask you to kind of give some final comments, and then we'll open it up to some Q&A for the audience, so that we get you guys out of here on time. But I think we heard a lot that we've heard most of our clients struggling with this year, being challenged by, and we've seen people rising to that challenge. Some final thoughts about where we see things going.
I thought all the panelists did a fantastic job of bringing them to light. I get pretty excited when James talks about the power of technology and health. So, but I think, the things I would say that I heard everybody talk about were hybrid experience, right? So it's not going to be just online going forward. It's not going to be just in person. We're all trying to figure out what the hybrid experience looks like for our customers and for our employees, and so on and so forth. So that's clearly something that I think everybody's still working on. The importance of data, the willingness of people to share that data has gone up exponentially, which is going to bring trust and security to the forefront of handling that data and what we do with it. And we've all seen recent things going on with the new iOS update, and how many people opt in to share it and how many people don't. And I think there's a new era upon us on kind of how we handle data and monetization of data and those sorts of things. I think everybody talked about moving faster than they ever have before, and having the tech infrastructure to kind of enable that moving forward. And then lastly, I would say, the willingness not only of companies, but of our customers to experiment with things that seem like they were a long ways away before, right? The remote surgery, perhaps, RPA in certain places, just things that, gosh, they felt a long ways away a year ago. Like, man, am I really going to do that? And now everybody's like, yeah, I'm going to start experimenting with that stuff. So I think, it's really kind of accelerated, as Mary said, push the fast forward button a bit.
And we do have, thank you, Rob. We do have one question that came in about remote work, and about whether or not we can measure the productivity, or should we be measuring the productivity of remote workers. That, there's technologies being developed to track workers. And my personal opinion, because the future of work and where work is going is something I've been focused on, but you have to really think about, how do you know people are working today when they're in person? Is it because they're sitting at their desk? Or are you measuring them on tasks? Are you giving them things that you can see tangible results for? So as a leader, as an employer, thinking about how you're handling work now, thinking about that, rather than it's someone showing up and being where you can see them. And that's not scalable. But I'll open up to the panelists for that questions, and anyone else who has one before we close our session today.
Jennifer, I love that question, because I think one of our epiphanies was that management had sort of, I don't want to oversimplify, but most of the managing we were doing was making sure people were in their seats between 9 and 5 or whatever their hours were. And once they were remote, we were like, well, what do our people normally do, and how do we measure whether they're doing it well? So that's going to be a huge culture shift for us moving forward, that we're going to have better baselines on what good performance looks like for service. And I think the worst thing in the world would be some tool where employees think Big Brother is watching and we're going to be punitive. But we need to do a much better job than we had done before in having baseline expectations for service and having better ways of determining whether our employees are adding value. And we know they all want to. Sometimes the systems have not allowed employees to add value the way that they could. So I think overall, just the pandemic has shown a light on the fact that we didn't measure the effectiveness of some of our employees as well as we should. And we're going to do that better moving forward.
And Treasurer Ma or James?
Yeah, and I would say, I think I'm working harder during the pandemic because I start with an 8 o'clock call every day. And sometimes I'm lucky if I end at 5. Sometimes there's like a 6 o'clock, a 7 o'clock, 8 o'clock Zoom call, and it's like back to back all day long. My eyes, I know, have gotten worse, with these lights and just staring at your screen the whole time. And I do believe for people who are, diligent and want to do a good job, they're working harder than before versus, in the office, you go to your office, you drive, you can listen to the radio, you can stop by Starbucks and pick up your coffee, and then you sit down and you maybe like read your paper, right? There was like a lot of downtime that I find during the pandemic sitting in a seat. I'm just more intense, more exhausted than being able to go and travel. So I kind of like the combination of going into the office or doing my, visits around the stakes. It does give me a little downtime than just like staring at the screen all day. So on the other hand, there are probably people that aren't working as hard at home, right? Because don't have to be on meetings, you're not on Zoom calls. And so it's harder to track, what those folks are doing. But I have found that even in this pandemic, we can figure out who is really working and who is not working. Even in this remote environment, we can still figure it out.
Yeah, absolutely. And we did have two other questions come in about work, and I'll just quickly address those, but we might need to take those as a follow-up. But the geography of work changing and the blurring of lines between personal and home, Treasurer Ma, I think you addressed a little bit of that. And then the culture, needing to have that culture happen when you're bringing people on to start working who've never set foot in your office and don't know what the culture is. How do we continue to take those through? So any quick thoughts or comments on that? And then I'll turn it over to Barry to close.
I think if I could, maybe this hybrid approach to everything and bringing new people into work. So we continue to hire. We have people leave. We have jobs that need to be filled. We continue to hire, but they're coming into an organization in a very different posture. And so one of the things that we realized, and I know I realized this as a leader, I'm a much more social leader than I ever would have said I was before I lost that opportunity to socialize with my people on a more regular basis, or the people that I support. And I think that that's something that everyone is challenged with. Interestingly, I was talking to some nurses on a clinical area. They're new nurses. They've only worked with us for 6 months. And it was a 6-month check-in. And they said, we never have worked in a Sutter hospital where visitors were allowed to come in. And now visitors are allowed to start coming back in. So they're like, nobody ever bothered us. We could just care for the patient and there were no visitors to deal with now. But visitors are a part of what we do. It's part of the environment we want to provide. We want to make sure families have a comfortable and safe way to visit their loved ones when they're in the hospitals. But our staff wasn't used to that. At least the new ones weren't used to that. So it's another one of those change management things. And we're worried about the thing that Treasurer Ma mentioned, are people that are working at home, the ones that are working really hard. I'm finding that we have to monitor their downtime, not their uptime, because they're on 24/7. It's all Zoom, it's all email. It's very easy to just keep the activity level high, and we need to stop them from doing that to themselves. And we can monitor the times that they're on, systems. And so we're looking at both sides of that. And I think our employee wellness is a really important aspect of this, because they're working. The ones that have the intention to work hard are working harder than they have before.
Yeah, thank you, James. Barry, Thank you for having us, panelists. Thank you so much for your time, taking time away, and grateful actually for Zoom, because I don't know that we could have got a panel like this together in regular days with travel times and schedules. So I'm very grateful to you guys for your time and perspectives today. And thank you all for the work that you're doing for the greater good of our community, in education, in getting us money, and in taking care of our health. So thank you.
Yeah, well, first off, I want to thank Accenture and James and Fiona and Rob, and really a lot of great things are happening in our community because great leaders are stepping up. Who would have thought a year and 2 months after this pandemic, the state would have $75 billion in a surplus? Probably only business leaders, right, James? But because they're paying it. But there's a lot of exciting things going on in our community. We've got really the highest caliber of companies looking at our community. We're going to have unprecedented growth. I know people were disappointed at about a 300,000 job number in April, but I think it's naive to think this economy is going to come back like a rubber band snapping. We probably are going to be through 2024 to get wages and inflation and equity and social progress, fiscal stability and economic stability all ironed out. But after the shot we've taken, I'm sure we're all relieved that we're doing better than we thought. I think when I think about all this, and I know Chancellor King, we're still in this community training people for low wage jobs, and that has to stop. So when you think about the future of work and how are people going to pivot and shift, these jobs are going to be more sophisticated. Labor market shortages are showing up all over the country, and we're going to have to pay people more, which is good news from an economic development standpoint. But in order to sustain that, people are going to have to be more skilled and bring more to the table. So I want to thank Accenture and all of the leaders here today. I want to thank our broader community for staying engaged. I doubt that any of us thought we'd be in the great shape that we are today, but we need to do more, think bigger, take greater strides. I really hope and pray that we won't let this unique opportunity go by us without coming out of here being a better Sacramento, a better California, a better country. So thank you very much. And thank you for having us. And everyone have a wonderful day.